Today, we are celebrating the life and homegoing of Rodger Dwight Eakin. But you already knew that. My name is Beth Eakin O'Neill, and I am daughter number one. That's what Daddy always wrote in the cards my mother bought and forced him to sign. He'd address me as daughter number one. And if you've ever seen the old John Wayne movie Donovan's Reef, you may understand why he always spelled it D-O-T-T-E-R.
Daughter, D-O-T-T-E-R.
That's right, 2T.
It truly was by the grace of God that we were allowed time there at the end of his life while his mind was still clear when we knew this was coming. So when Mom and Rachel laid the honor of his eulogy on me, I decided to go straight to the source. Of course, as a minister, my father attended and served at many funerals throughout his life. So I took the opportunity to ask him, in all the memorials you've ever attended, what were some of the things you remembered and enjoyed most hearing about people who had passed? He thought about it for a minute and then said, well, to be honest, I never really liked eulogies. Never understood what they were supposed to be for. Oh, great, Daddy. Now I'm on my own. A eulogy is supposed to be a remembrance of the life of the person who has passed, and a good eulogy creates a snapshot of who they really were. I pray I am capable of adequately honoring the man he was. Umberto Eco wrote, I believe that what we become depends on what our fathers teach us at odd moments, when they aren't trying to teach us. We are formed by the little scraps of wisdom. Now, if you've read the biography and seen the photos, you know. Rodger was the oldest child of Floyd, better known as Mink, and Christine Eakin. Mink and Christine were sharecroppers in the tiny rural community of Carnes in northern Alabama, and they led a hard life. Rodger was born in that little house, a 10.5-pound baby boy born to a woman who stood half an inch over 5 feet tall, and no epidural. He remembered clearly that Christine, whom I knew as Bigamama, would frequently make a point of letting him know she loved him. She was proud of him. And Mink did too, in his own way. He was followed into this world by his sisters Pam, Debbie, and Melba, and a brother Milan, who unexpectedly passed 20 years ago. I remember even as a child that these 5 siblings were a party waiting to happen. Although Daddy said his siblings were a lot like me and my sibling. He said, I put you in that room by yourself. You're not funny. You put your sister in that room alone. Well, she's just not that funny either. Thanks, Dad. But you get everyone in a room together and within half an hour the house is shaking with laughter. And that is consistently what you would see when this family came together. He loved being with his family, his extended family, his immediate family. He reveled in the time he spent with his siblings, and he told me, I'd fight the world for them. In those moments, in watching him, my father taught me how to enjoy family. Daddy developed a love of reading as a teenager, sitting in the corner of that house behind the stove. He'd read his grandfather's gun westerns in that warm little corner. He loved westerns right up until the day he died. Throughout his life, he always wished he was a better scholar or he could read faster. He'd be constantly frustrated with his brother Milan, who could just blow through the books, or one of his daughters, reading faster than him. But his love of books and ink pens endured right through his life. The man left behind around 3,000 books, which he called his friends. By the way, if anyone is still looking for a copy of Lewis Grizzard's Don't Bend Over in the Garden, Granny, you know them taters got eyes, you just let us know. We don't have an exact number on the ink pens. We just kept finding them. But we assume it's somewhere around 7 trillion. But in all seriousness, my father taught me to relish reading and respect knowledge. When he was around 15 or 16 years old, Daddy accepted Christ and was baptized at the First Baptist Church in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Now, if you knew Rodger Eakin, you knew that his faith was central to who he was. He knew there is a God. He knew the historical person of Jesus of Nazareth lived, performed miracles, was crucified, and then was seen alive and resurrected by hundreds of witnesses. Sometime between Daddy's baptism and the end of his schooling, he felt called to go into ministry so he could tell others what he knew on a larger scale. My father taught me about the way the world really is. Thanks to the Herculean efforts of many in his community, he found himself at Belmont College, studying religion. It was at Belmont that this funny, friendly, yet socially awkward country boy, who at that time believed women shouldn't wear makeup or pants with zippers, and that men and women swimming together was deeply sinful, he met an extroverted, makeup-wielding, headstrong young woman who pertly informed him she was available on Tuesday night. 3 years later, Rodger, Eakin, and Joan Culbertson married, and I, for one, am rather glad they did. I assume Rachel is as well. The next several decades, including the births and raising of 2 children, weren't always easy. Mom describes them in those early years as oil and water. But my parents believed strongly in the sanctity of marriage, and they honored their vows and served and loved each other and their churches, friends, and neighbors self-sacrificially, and their communities were all the stronger for it. My father and my mother both taught me and embodied commitment. Now, you may have read Daddy pastored 7 churches over the half-century of his career. If the doors were open, it's likely he and Mom were there. Glenwood Baptist was his last. He retired from the pulpit a year before he passed, so it seemed appropriate to gather there, at his Omega, to celebrate his life. His first church, the Alpha, was Burt Baptist Church in Cannon County and is where we committed his ashes to the earth. My father performed his first baptism at Burt Baptist. Well, not at Burt, technically, but in the creek behind one of the deacons' houses just upstream of the pig pen. Daddy said it was the coldest water in 14 counties. The first person he ever baptized was a little girl named Deborah. She nearly got away from him, just rolled right off his hand, but he salvaged the situation. He got her pulled back up. While she was wading back to the bank, she hollered, "Mama, that preacher nearly drowned me," which of course became a running joke at Burt Baptist. But over the next 50 years, my father nearly drowned somewhere around 150 to 200 other people, including daughters number 1 and 2. And I am happy to report that his baptism technique improved considerably over the years. In fact, I use him as a measure against which I rate other preachers' baptisms, which is not the point, but I still do it. He had that process down to an art, and I've never really seen anyone do it quite that well. You may not have thought about this, but there's a lot more to being a preacher than just standing there and pounding a pulpit. Preachers must be orators, theologians, administrators, diplomats, tightrope walkers, and ministers. And it is there, in ministering to others, that I think my father found the deepest core, the marrow of his calling. He excelled at being your pastor. If he knew you were at the hospital, he'd be at the hospital. If he found out you were grieving, he'd be a source of strength and comfort while demanding nothing of you in those moments you had nothing to give. And if you missed his visit, you still won, because more than likely you'd wind up with one of the little cards he had printed up that read, "You have been pasteurized." And there'd always be a personal note written in there just for you, and sometimes it would even be legible. My father not only taught me, but demonstrated the importance of having and serving a faith community. By watching him, I learned what it is to respect others regardless of who they are and what they do. He had a kind word of acknowledgement and a sincere gratitude toward everyone he met, whether they were meeting him for lunch, picking up his trash, or operating on his body. He had the kind of respectful attitude toward ladies you seldom see anymore. Even in those last weeks when his strength started failing, when his hospice nurse, Anne, would come to the house, he would struggle to his feet, and she'd protest, No, don't get up, you're fine right where you are. And he'd pause, squint at her, and say, "You didn't know my mama," before straightening to his full height to welcome a lady into his space. He opened doors for people, deferred to the elderly, and if there was a stalled car and a defeated motorist in the road, Daddy would be one of those people jumping out of his own car to run and help push. And so my father showed me what a gentleman is. There towards the end, I was staying with my parents for a few days, and my mother left the house to go to work. Daddy, sick, unsteady, and drugged to the gills, pulled himself up to walk her out and see her off, just like he did every morning. But he came back in a little agitated, and he said, "If I say to you, whoa, what do you think that means?" Stop what you're doing? "That woman tried to run me over again." So despite apparently multiple unsuccessful attempts at vehicular homicide, my parents celebrated their 50th anniversary in 2020. Well, they tried to. We had a celebratory Alaskan cruise planned, but the pandemic delayed that. We'd been trying to replan the trip for 2021. Daddy wasn't really excited about that. He never liked travel. Said he'd rather die. It's supposed to be hyperbole, Daddy. People expressed a lot of amazement or even seemed weirdly encouraged by how casually and matter-of-factly our family handled Rodger Eakin's upcoming death. And that's on my daddy, too. Death, we know, is a natural and unavoidable part of life. And it's truly not something we celebrate or take lightly. But Christians know this is not the way it really ends. We were created for eternity, and my father was fully cognizant of that. Daddy loved life, but he wasn't afraid of death. When my mother asked him, "Are you scared to die?" he answered, "Why should I be? Jesus took care of that 2,000 years ago." When I asked him, "How do you feel about dying? Like, what is that even like?" He said, "I'm partying. I'm ready to go home. Let's get this show on the road." I guess that's at least one trip he didn't mind taking. I asked him, if you got to decide what people said and thought about you, what would you want them to say? How do you want to be remembered? He said,
I want them to think of Rodger as a fun-loving feller who is so proud of himself and so proud to be a part of the human race. I'm just going to be a laughing fool. Not a silly laugh, but a laugh that says, hey, this world is not my home, but I'm just passing through. I'm making the most of what I got.
Rachel and I have never really discussed this, but I felt pretty confident in speaking for both of us when I say I think a very large component of our respective self-identities, how we perceive ourselves and the world around us, is rooted in laughter. And I was able to thank my father before he left us for that sort of internal locus of joy and fun, because that sense of whimsy is a gift he gave us. Another one of those things he taught us in odd moments when he wasn't trying to teach us at all. It's one of the things I remember most about growing up. One of the things I most value about the person I have become. So I thanked him for that. And he said, I want that to be my legacy to you and Rachel. And I want to lift the spirit of you two girls every time you think of me. If I had to say I only had one thing left, I want laughter to be what you girls remember about Daddy. Well, my daddy, you have succeeded.